To truly understand Jacob's journey, we first need to dive into the historical and cultural backdrop where his story unfolds. Jacob's narrative is set during a pivotal time in Israel's history when concepts like family, blessings, and birthrights played crucial roles in shaping both social and spiritual structures. Jacob's story takes place in Canaan, a land that would eventually become the heart of Israel's people. Back then, life revolved around the patriarchal family, where the father was the central figure responsible for passing down the blessing and the birthright, something that carried not just material, but also spiritual significance. The birthright was reserved for the eldest son, granting him a double portion of the inheritance and the leadership of the family after the father's death. The father's blessing, on the other hand, was seen as a divine confirmation of prosperity, protection, and the continuation of God's covenant. It's within this context that family tensions come to life. Sibling rivalries, parental favoritism, and schemes to secure the future were common, and they explain much of Jacob's and his family's actions. The main characters in this story aren't flawless heroes. In fact, their imperfections are what make them so relatable and human. Jacob, the younger of the twins, Jacob was born holding Esau's heel, almost as if he were already vying for something greater. His name means heel grabber or deceiver, a trait that would mark his early actions. Esau, the older brother, a strong and instinctive man, he was Isaac's favorite because of his hunting skills and impulsive nature. Rebekah, the mother of Jacob and Esau, a strategic and determined woman. Rebekah plays a critical role in the story, making decisions that would shape her sons' futures. Isaac, the family patriarch, whose passivity in many moments allows tensions between his sons to escalate. The family dynamics in Jacob's story aren't all that different from those we face today. Parental favoritism, for instance, is a universal theme that can lead to sibling rivalries and feelings of rejection. Ask yourself, how have my family dynamics shaped who I am today? Am I repeating patterns of favoritism, competition, or manipulation in my own relationships? When we reflect on these themes, we realize that Jacob's story isn't just an ancient narrative. It's a mirror that helps us see our own struggles and our potential for transformation. Jacob's journey starts way before his birth, at a moment when God was already revealing a bigger plan for his life. Even in his mother's womb, he and his brother Esau were struggling, a foreshadowing of the rivalry that would define their lives. The story of Jacob and Esau begins with a divine promise. Rebekah, unable to have children for many years, finally conceived after Isaac's prayers, but her pregnancy was anything but smooth. The two babies moved so much in her womb that she sought God's guidance. His response came as a prophecy. 2. Nations are in your womb. Two peoples will be separated from within you. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Genesis 25:23. This revelation placed Rebekah in a pivotal role in the story. From the start, she knew that Jacob, the younger son, was God's chosen one to receive the blessing and birthright. This understanding shaped many of her future decisions. The birth of the twins was filled with symbolism. Esau was born first, red and hairy, traits that hinted at his impulsive and rough nature. Jacob came right after, holding Esau's heel, as if already fighting for his position. This scene perfectly captures the central theme of Jacob's life: struggle. From the moment he entered the world, Jacob seemed destined to wrestle for his identity, his blessing, and his place in God's plan. As the boys grew up, it became obvious that their parents had favorites. Esau, being the firstborn, was Isaac's favorite. He was a skilled hunter, an outdoorsman who impressed his father with his game. Jacob, on the other hand, was quieter, preferring to stay close to the tents, and won Rebekah's heart. This favoritism created a clear divide in the family, fueling the conflict between the brothers. Rebekah, believing in the divine prophecy, began scheming to ensure Jacob received what she believed was rightfully his. Isaac, perhaps clinging to tradition, saw Esau as the natural heir. Parental favoritism is a theme that still hits home today. Maybe you felt like you were at a disadvantage for not being the favorite in some area of your life, whether at home, at work, or in relationships. Or maybe you found yourself in Isaac or Rebekah's shoes, favoring one side over the other. Jacob's story reminds us that these dynamics can leave lasting scars. It challenges us to strive for balance, treat others with fairness, and trust in God's plan, even when we can't fully grasp his intentions. One of the most striking moments in Jacob and Esau's story is the infamous exchange of the birthright for a bowl of lentil stew. This episode perfectly captures the stark differences between the brothers' personalities and delivers a powerful lesson about impulsive decisions and spiritual priorities. Picture Esau, a skilled hunter, coming back from a long, exhausting day in the field. He's drained, physically, emotionally, and probably even mentally. Meanwhile, Jacob, who had stayed home, was cooking a pot of lentil stew, the aroma wafting through the air and only intensifying Esau's hunger. Unable to resist, Esau blurted out, "Let me have some of that red stuff because I'm starving." Genesis 25:30. Jacob saw his chance. Calmly and strategically, he made a proposition. "First, sell me your birthright." Genesis 25:31. Without much thought, Esau replied, "Look, I'm about to die. What good is a birthright to me?" Genesis 25:32. And just like that, Esau sealed the deal with an oath, handing over a birthright that carried not just material wealth, but also profound spiritual significance. In return, he got a simple bowl of stew. This moment is loaded with symbolism. Esau represents those who live impulsively, chasing immediate satisfaction without pausing to consider long-term consequences. Sure, his hunger was real, but was it really worth giving up something so precious for a fleeting desire? Jacob, on the other hand, embodies strategy and ambition. While his methods are certainly questionable, his determination to secure what he believed mattered most is undeniably striking. In a spiritual sense, the birthright symbolized the continuation of God's plan, a responsibility and privilege Esau didn't seem to value as much as Jacob did. This stark contrast in priorities is what sets the two brothers' worlds apart. How often, in our own lives, do we trade something of lasting value for momentary gratification? Maybe it's a reckless financial decision, a toxic relationship, or compromising our principles for short-lived pleasure. Esau's story warns us about the dangers of acting on impulse. It challenges us to stop and ask ourselves, is this really worth it? Am I sacrificing something meaningful for a fleeting desire? On the flip side, Jacob's approach teaches us the importance of valuing God's blessings. At the same time, it reminds us that the path to those blessings should always be guided by integrity. Esau dismissed what was sacred, and it had profound consequences in his life. Like him, we sometimes fail to recognize the value of God's promises, choosing immediate satisfaction instead. So the real question is, are we prioritizing what's eternal, or are we settling for what's temporary? One of the most iconic episodes in Jacob's story is the deception he carried out, helped by his mother, Rebekah, to steal the blessing that Isaac intended for Esau. This event not only exposes the complexities of family relationships, but also sheds light on the consequences of immoral choices, even when driven by good intentions. Isaac, now old and nearly blind, sensed that his days were numbered. He called Esau, his favorite son, and asked him to prepare a special meal before granting him the paternal blessing. Esau, ever obedient, immediately set out to hunt and prepare the dish. Rebekah, overhearing their conversation, saw an opportunity to ensure that Jacob, the chosen one according to the prophecy, would receive the blessing instead. She instructed Jacob to deceive his father. The plan was bold. Jacob would impersonate Esau by using goatskins to mimic his brother's hairy arms and wearing Esau's clothes to replicate his scent. At first, Jacob hesitated, worried about the fallout. He knew that if he were caught, he wouldn't just lose the blessing, he'd bring his father's curse upon himself. But Rebekah insisted, reassuring him that she'd take any punishment upon herself. So Jacob went along with the plan. He brought the meal Rebekah had prepared to Isaac, pretending to be Esau. Isaac, suspicious, asked questions to confirm his son's identity. Though the voice sounded like Jacob's, the smell of the clothes and the feel of the hairy arms convinced him. Isaac then bestowed the blessing, declaring prosperity, dominion over nations, and supremacy over Jacob's siblings. This blessing was irrevocable. In the culture of the time, spoken words held an almost divine authority. Not long after, Esau returned from his hunt, only to discover that the blessing had already been given to Jacob. Devastated, he cried out, "Bless me too, my father!" Genesis 27:34. But Isaac couldn't undo what had been done. Esau was furious and vowed to kill Jacob after their father's mourning period. Rebekah, learning of Esau's intentions, told Jacob to flee to her brother Laban's house in Haran while Jacob secured the blessing. It came at a steep cost. He had to leave his family and live in exile for years. Esau, consumed by rage, became his bitter enemy, and Rebekah, who orchestrated it all, never saw her favorite son again. This episode teaches us that even when our intentions align with God's plans, using deceitful methods leads to painful consequences. Jacob would have inherited the promise, regardless, as it was God's plan. But by taking matters into his own hands, he complicated his journey. How often do we try to help God's plans by taking shortcuts that compromise our integrity? Like Jacob and Rebekah, we might justify our actions with good intentions, but the ends never justify the means. This story challenges us to trust in God's timing and methods, even when things feel uncertain. It reminds us that choices rooted in deception or manipulation leave scars on ourselves and on others. Am I trusting God's plans, or am I forcing situations to achieve my own goals? How can I seek God's blessing with integrity, without compromising my values? After fleeing Esau's wrath, Jacob set off on a journey to Haran, the land of his ancestors. Alone, vulnerable, and essentially on the run, he stopped to rest at a place called Luz, later known as Bethel. It was there, in a moment of deep uncertainty and fear, that Jacob had a profound encounter with God through a dream. As he slept, Jacob had an extraordinary vision. He saw a ladder stretching from earth to heaven, with angels going up and down on it. At the top of the ladder stood God himself, who spoke to Jacob and reaffirmed the promise he had made to Abraham and Isaac. "I am the Lord, the God of your father, Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west, to the east, to the north, and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring." Genesis 28:13-14. God also gave Jacob a deeply personal promise. "I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Genesis 28:15. The ladder represents the connection between humanity and the divine. It's a symbol that God isn't distant, but actively involved in Jacob's life and in the unfolding of human history. The angels, ascending and descending, reflect a constant communication between heaven and earth, a reminder that God is in control. This dream also points to something greater, the redemptive work of Christ. In the Gospel of John, Jesus refers to himself as that very bridge between heaven and earth. You will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. John 1:51. When Jacob woke up, he was awestruck by what he had experienced. He exclaimed, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." Genesis 28:16. With a sense of reverence, he took the stone he had used as a pillow, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil over it, dedicating the place to God. He named the place Bethel, which means house of God. Jacob also made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God." Genesis 28:20-21. This moment marked a turning point in Jacob's life. Up until then, his faith seemed inherited from his parents. But now he had his first personal encounter with God. It's a powerful reminder that even in our most vulnerable moments, God reveals himself and reassures us of his presence. Like Jacob, we often find ourselves running from our mistakes, fears, or responsibilities. But it's in those moments that God often steps in, not to condemn us, but to remind us of his plan and promises. Have you ever had a moment where you clearly felt God's presence, even in the middle of a tough situation? How do you respond to God's promises? Like Jacob, with a vow of commitment or with hesitation, struggling to fully trust. After the dream at Bethel, Jacob continued his journey to Haran, seeking refuge at his uncle Laban's house. It was there that he faced years of challenges, deception, and personal growth, experiences that would shape his character and pave the way for his spiritual transformation. When Jacob arrived in Haran, he went to the town well, where shepherds gathered to water their flocks. There he met Rachel, Laban's younger daughter, and immediately fell head over heels for her. The biblical account of their meeting captures a moment of deep emotion and connection, marking the beginning of an important chapter in Jacob's life. Jacob offered to work for Laban in exchange for Rachel's hand in marriage, proposing 7 years of labor as her bride price. The Bible describes how those years seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her, Genesis 29:20. But when the time came for the wedding, Laban deceived Jacob, giving him Leah, his older daughter, instead of Rachel. Jacob only realized the switch the morning after the wedding, a moment that echoed Jacob's own deceit toward Esau and Isaac. When Jacob confronted Laban, his uncle justified his actions by citing the local tradition that the older daughter must marry before the younger. To marry Rachel, Jacob agreed to work an additional 7 years, making it a total of 14 years of service. Jacob ended up staying in Haran for many years, working diligently for Laban. During this time, Laban deceived him multiple times, but Jacob's skills and determination led him to thrive. One notable example was the agreement Jacob and Laban made about Jacob's wages from the flocks. Jacob used innovative and strategic methods to grow his own wealth while tending Laban's livestock. This demonstrated not only his intelligence, but also how God was blessing his efforts, even in the face of unfair treatment. The years Jacob spent in Haran were a period of refinement. The man, once known for his cunning and deceit, began to mature. His experiences with Laban taught him about the consequences of deception, as well as the value of patience and honest work. More importantly, these years served as a reminder that God was with Jacob, fulfilling his promise to care for him. Despite the hardships, Jacob prospered, built a family, and started becoming the leader God intended him to be. Reaping what we sow. Just as Jacob faced deception in Haran, we also experience the consequences of our past actions. Yet God can use these moments to shape and transform us. Here are some key takeaways: patience and perseverance. Jacob worked for years to achieve his goals, showing how patience and persistence can lead to the fulfillment of our dreams. God blesses, even in hard times. Even while enduring injustices, Jacob experienced God's faithfulness and blessings in his life. What challenges are you facing right now that could be opportunities for personal and spiritual growth? How can you trust God to guide you through seasons of difficulty or waiting? After years of working in Haran, Jacob decided it was time to return to his homeland. But this homecoming wouldn't be easy. He knew he'd have to face Esau, the brother who had once sworn to kill him. In the midst of fear and anxiety, Jacob experienced one of the most pivotal moments of his life, a spiritual struggle that would change not only his name, but also his identity. As Jacob and his family approached the land of Canaan, he sent messengers ahead to inform Esau of his arrival and to try to ease any lingering resentment. The messengers returned with unsettling news. Esau was coming to meet Jacob, and he wasn't alone. He was bringing 400 men. Terrified for his life and the safety of his family, Jacob divided his group into two camps, hoping that at least one might escape if the worst happened. That night, Jacob prayed fervently, pleading for God's protection and reminding him of the promises made back at Bethel. This prayer revealed a humbler Jacob, one who fully acknowledged his dependence on God. After sending his family and possessions ahead, Jacob stayed behind, alone. It was then that he encountered a man and wrestled with him throughout the night. This man was in fact a manifestation of God, often interpreted as an angel or a theophany, a divine appearance. The struggle was physical, but it was also deeply spiritual. Jacob wrestled with all his might, refusing to give up until he received a blessing. At the height of the struggle, the man touched Jacob's hip, dislocating it. Yet Jacob persisted, declaring, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Genesis 32:26. The man asked him, "What is your name?" Genesis 32:27. When Jacob answered, he wasn't just stating his name. He was acknowledging everything it represented. Deceiver. In that moment, God gave Jacob a new name, Israel, meaning one who struggles with God. This new name symbolized Jacob's transformation, from a man who relied on his cunning to achieve his goals, to someone who now trusted in God's power and promises. The struggle ended with Jacob receiving the blessing he had sought. However, he left the encounter limping, a physical reminder of his experience with God. Jacob's wrestling match with the angel serves as a powerful metaphor for the internal and spiritual battles we all face. Like Jacob, we each have areas in our lives that need to be confronted and transformed. This story also shows us that God doesn't dismiss our efforts to seek Him. Instead, He honors our persistence and blesses us in the process. God meets us. In our vulnerability, Jacob was alone, afraid and uncertain. It was in that state of weakness that God revealed Himself, showing that even in our lowest moments, we can find strength in His presence. Here are some key takeaways. Persistence in faith. Jacob teaches us to never give up on seeking God's blessing, even when the journey feels tough or painful. Transformation requires surrender. Jacob could only receive a new name and a new identity after wrestling with his struggles and acknowledging his dependence on God. What battles are you facing today? Are you willing to surrender to God and allow Him to transform your life, even if it means going through some painful challenges? After his transformative struggle with God at the Jabbok Valley, Jacob moved forward to face the encounter he dreaded most, meeting his brother Esau. This moment was filled with tension, vulnerability, and, ultimately, reconciliation. It also became a powerful display of the impact of forgiveness and spiritual growth in Jacob's life. Understanding the destructive power of resentment, Jacob prepared carefully for the meeting. He sent valuable gifts to Esau, flocks of sheep, goats, camels, and other livestock, as a gesture of humility and an attempt to make amends for his past wrongs. Jacob also arranged his family strategically, dividing them into groups and placing Rachel and Joseph, his favorites, at the back. While this revealed his ongoing favoritism, it also showed his deep concern for his family's safety in a potentially dangerous situation. However, more important than any physical preparation was Jacob's prayer. He sought God's protection and intervention, fully aware that reconciliation would not be possible without divine help. When Jacob finally saw Esau approaching with 400 men, he bowed down 7 times as a sign of respect, showing that he had no intention of confronting but was instead seeking peace. This humble act was a stark contrast to the manipulative and ambitious Jacob of the past. To Jacob's surprise, Esau didn't respond with anger, but with an embrace. The Bible captures the emotional intensity of this moment. But Esau ran to meet Jacob, threw his arms around his neck, kissed him, and they wept. Genesis 33:4. This reunion was a moment of redemption for both brothers. Esau demonstrated that he had let go of his resentment and was willing to forgive, while Jacob showed that he had changed, owning up to his faults and approaching with humility. The reconciliation between Jacob and Esau is one of the most powerful biblical stories about forgiveness. It teaches us that no matter how deeply relationships are wounded, restoration is possible. However, it requires effort, humility, and often divine intervention. Esau's forgiveness also reminds us that holding on to bitterness doesn't lead to peace. He chose to let go of revenge and embrace his brother, an act that brought healing to them both. Reconciliation requires humility. Jacob had to confront his past mistakes and seek peace with his brother, a process that demanded both courage and vulnerability. Forgiveness frees both parties. By forgiving Jacob, Esau chose to move forward and leave the burden of bitterness behind. God works in restoration. The reconciliation between Jacob and Esau wasn't just the result of human effort. It was also a reflection of God's divine intervention. Is there a relationship in your life that needs reconciliation? Are you willing to take the first step, even if it requires humility and vulnerability? Jacob's journey is one of the most inspiring and complex stories in the Bible. He began his life as a man driven by ambition and deception, but he ended as Israel, the patriarch who gave his name to a nation and became a powerful example of spiritual transformation. His story teaches us profound lessons about God's grace, the importance of repentance, and the power of perseverance. Jacob's life started with competition, even before he was born. He used cunning to take Esau's birthright and blessing, but it led to a life of running and fear. Yet God never gave up on him. Instead, God met Jacob in his most vulnerable moments, reaffirmed his promises, and guided him toward transformation. Jacob's encounter with God in the dream of the ladder marked the beginning of his spiritual journey. His years in Haran were a time of learning and growth, where he faced the consequences of his own actions. But it was in his wrestling match with the angel that his true transformation occurred. God changed his name, and with it, his identity. Jacob was no longer the deceiver. He became Israel, the one who wrestles with God. His reunion with Esau was the ultimate test of Jacob's transformation. He faced his fears, sought reconciliation with humility, and received his brother's forgiveness. This part of the story reminds us that no relationship is beyond restoration when we trust in God and take the first step. Jacob left behind a lasting legacy. His 12 sons became the leaders of Israel's tribes, forming the foundation of the nation chosen by God to fulfill his purpose on earth. Even more, Jacob's story points to the redemptive work of Christ, the ultimate bridge between heaven and earth. His life is a powerful reminder that God uses imperfect people to carry out his perfect plans. He doesn't choose the qualified, he qualifies the chosen. Like Jacob, we are called to leave behind our mistakes and strive for the spiritual transformation God desires in our lives. Jacob's story challenges us to trust God's plan, even when the journey seems uncertain or full of struggles. It inspires us to seek transformation, persevere through our battles, and work toward reconciliation in our relationships. Above all, it reminds us that God never abandons us, even in our darkest moments. Just like Jacob, you can experience God's grace and transformation. No matter where you are today, God has a plan for your life, and He is with you every step of the way. If this message touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this story. And remember, there are other videos on the channel that can bless your life. They're popping up on the screen right now. See you next time, and may God bless you.